Hey everyone, there's definitely some misconception when it comes to sewing, and in today's video I will debunk 5 common sewing myths. You can whip up a garment in just a few hours. I'm sure you've even seen patterns claiming like this is a 2-hour pattern. Now, there are definitely certain garments that are very quick to make, but setting a time limit can actually, I think, create unrealistic expectation on exactly how fast you can make a garment, especially if you're not very experienced. And there are lots of reasons why usually it takes a lot longer, because just the prep work of measuring and cutting out and doing alterations, perhaps attaching interfacing to some of the garment pieces, all that takes time. And then again, in order to make sure that the result is satisfactory, you usually need to do some prep work as well, and making sure that everything aligns and looks nice just even before you start sewing. So if you factor in that time, I am very skeptical of the claim that you can whip up, say, a top in 2 hours. Now, of course, if you're really fast and you have your machine set up and you have a serger, well, of course that will go faster, especially if you're experienced. But for most of us, sewing will take way longer than a couple of hours. Sewing is easy. Now, I know that some of you would perhaps argue with me that they would say that in fact sewing is easy, but let me clarify. When I say I don't think sewing is easy, I mean that yes, understanding the basics of sewing, that is quite easy, but it's way more difficult to master this craft. And I don't say that in a way to sort of not be encouraging. In fact, I say this with the opposite intention, because if you understand that sewing is a complicated craft that takes a lot of time to learn, then you will also understand why sometimes, you know, the end result isn't as satisfactory as perhaps you'd hope, because, you know, it takes a lot of practice in order to learn all the sort of quite complicated techniques that sewing entails. And especially those of us who don't really make garments professionally, well, we don't have a lot of time practicing those skills. So we should not compare ourselves to someone who has been sewing for many years and perhaps even do it professionally. And we need to understand our own limitations, and in that way I would not say that sewing is easy. But that's also one of the things I love about sewing, is that you are constantly challenged. I learn new stuff all the time, which is why I never ever get bored of this hobby. And the third misconception, which I've heard a bit more lately, that I am afraid I don't agree with, is that sewing and sustainability goes hand in hand. I know that we all would love that it would be that way, and I can see why that misconception has happened, because as of doing this ourselves, many of us react fast fashion, we work with longevity, we work with quality materials, we put a lot of love and effort into our makes, and we also have an understanding of production of garment that the average customer doesn't have. But that doesn't mean that our hobby checks all the boxes of being a sustainable, environmentally friendly hobby. I would say if you only use like recycling or upcycling old garments, then definitely this can be a very sustainable way of making garment. And of course, if you just use, say, Deadstock fabrics that hasn't been traveling back and forth over the world, again, I would say that the argument is that sewing can be a sustainable thing. But let's be honest here, most of us, because we love this hobby so much, definitely make more garments that we really need. I just recently did a test on how environmentally friendly I was, and I was really interested to see how the definition of how much clothes is regarded as sort of a healthy way from a sustainable perspective. And I will have to say that I have way more garments than that. And one of the reasons for it is that I make my own clothes, and I make perhaps 1 or 2 garments a month, and that does add up over the time. And while I do try to make high quality, long lasting garment, I definitely also produce a lot of waste. So that is one of the reasons that I don't think sewing is by default eco-friendly. And another thing that we have to remember, that we only control a small part of the process. Most of us have no idea what has happened before we actually got the fabric in our hands. It can have been produced under appalling conditions, using harmful dyes, unfair labor condition and a lot of other things. So we need to be mindful of that as well, that there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle when we talk about sustainability. Hope you didn't get too depressed about this expose into this, but I definitely think so. And I would love to hear your thoughts about this as well, how you see sewing in the bigger picture when it comes to sustainability and environment conscious choices. So I'd love to keep that discussion going, so please share in the comment section. And another misconception is that sewing is budget friendly. Now, of course it can be if you really am frugal and only buy old used sewing machines and inexpensive materials. But let's be real, for the most of us, this is a hobby that we invest in, and hence why after a while we definitely want to use better materials, better tools. So yeah, it will start cost money, and so we really need to think about sewing as a hobby, not a way to save money necessarily. I think the only way that I would say that you could save money is if you use, say, designer fabrics and then made your own garments. So for instance, it's usually quite easy to access fabric from Italian designer companies such as Prada and Marni, and if you can make those garments of those fabrics, obviously that price tag will be much lower than if you bought a ready-made garment for that type of companies. But that is one exception, and of course if you only am really frugal about investing in materials. So I don't think we should view sewing as a money-saving hobby. Instead, it's a creative hobby, and thus it will cost money. And the final myth is the one I think we have all heard at one point or another, is that just because we like to make our own garments, that doesn't mean that we find fixing a broken zipper or having a pair of pants for others enjoyable. In fact, most of us probably don't even enjoy those alterations for ourselves. And if you're anything like me, every time someone asks me, there's a dark cloud coming over me, and even though I try to be polite, I do think that my tone of voice has a lot of resentment when I decline that offer. Now, of course, we have to understand, as I said, if you don't make your own clothes, you don't really understand how much work it goes into, especially switching a zipper, because in a jacket, there are layers and layers and layers of stitches. That is a absolutely cumbersome, time-consuming work, and I'm sure you have also heard variation of that. I would love to hear how you deal with those requests. Do you tell them like it is, or do you just kindly say no, or perhaps you say yes in a way of pleasing people, but inside you don't really want to do it? I would love to hear your thoughts about that, so please share in the comment section. Anyways, these were 5 sewing myths that I want to debunk. Now, I know that some of you will not agree with me of those things because there are not always tangible myths, right? So please give me your ideas on what you think are common sewing myths, and of course if you disagree with me, just tell me, I'd love to know. Anyways, if you haven't already, please subscribe, and also check out my blog, thelaststitch.com, for more information about sewing. Stitch safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!